I'm a retired pastor here at Queen Street United Methodist Church in downtown Kinston, North Carolina. Welcome to our weekly Wesley Bible class. Today we're going to be finishing up the book of Judges with another really bad event, and or series of them. And I hope this leads us to a better understanding of human nature and of how the history of the people of God is pretty checkered, and we need to be aware that every generation that calls itself the people of God can be checkered too if we're not careful. So we'll get into chapter 31. This is the last chapter in the book of Judges. A little background. Prior to chapter 31, we have one of the worst stories in the Bible. We have 21, sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm moving all the way into Samuel here, you know. Okay, we can't have that. Not good at math. Anyway. But I just passed my my Medicare test, so I'm mentally competent.
You remember those 3 words?
I remembered those 3 words. I still do, and always will. Problem is, it'll change in the next time. No. Okay. Yeah, I did all kinds of good stuff. So I'm still with us. Still with us, pretty much. Chapter 21. What's happened is that there's a Levite from the highland of Ephraim who has had a concubine who ran away from him back to Judah, to Bethlehem, and so he came down from Ephraim to recollect either his concubine or what he paid for her, and he managed to get the concubine back. And on his journey back to Ephraim, they went to Gilead, and in Gilead, the people there were not very nice. Somebody had taken him and his concubine and his servant into his house, and the people of Gilead, the men of Gilead, came out and demanded that they bring the Levite out so that they could mess with him. Okay? And the owner of the house, of course, using Middle Eastern hospitality rules, could not allow that to happen. So they offered the crowd outside his virgin daughter and the concubine of the Levite. Eventually, just the concubine got set outside, and then they set upon her all night long. And she died, one way or the other, she died the next day. We don't know if she died as a result of the assault or if she died at the hands of the Levite. But anyway, the Levite did not have the best reputation with this concubine anyway. So we don't know. He might have just offed her because she brought shame to him. It was that kind of a culture. But anyway, he cut her up and sent her pieces to the different tribes of Israel as a way of telling them that an atrocity had been committed. And it's an odd way to do it, but they came together and agreed that an atrocity had been committed. And so they decided not just to attack Gilead, but to demand of the tribe of Benjamin that they turn over the malefactors. And they said, no, you have no sovereignty here. And so the other tribes, the other 11 tribes, not 11, it wasn't all of them, but the tribes who had assembled decided they would make war against Benjamin. And evidently that didn't work out for a while. They had 2 big defeats, and then finally, God finally told them to go to battle and they would win, and this time they did. Of course, they changed tactics, that helped too. But anyway, they basically annihilated Benjamin, except for 600 of their warriors who went and fled to the hill country, and they hid among the rocks, and they had a very defensible position. And there were a couple of things that mitigated against them annihilating these remaining Benjaminites. One of them was that if they did that, there would then be, because they annihilated everybody outside of those 600 men. They annihilated the whole tribe of Benjamin. So men, women, children, dogs, cats, everything. They killed everybody and burned the place down. So if they destroy the 600 men, then there's not going to be 12 tribes of Israel anymore. There's going to be 11 tribes. And you know, God likes to round things out. So they need to have 12 tribes, okay? And the other thing is, these guys in the rocks don't have any loot worth taking. Why go up and fight them and lose some people for what? Just to kill Benjaminites? Hey, you know, there's no profit in that. So here's what they figure out. Now the Israelites had sworn at Mizpah, no one of us shall give his daughter in marriage to Benjamin, because they're so bad. Okay, so they're not going to give their daughters. Any of the tribes that came out to fight against Benjamin swore that they would not send their daughters to the tribe of Benjamin. Well, this is a problem. And the people came to Bethel and sat there until evening before God, and they lifted up their voice and wept bitterly. They said, O Lord, the God of Israel, why has it come to pass that today there should be but one tribe lacking in Israel? Well, it's because you killed them all. You know, but you know, it's God's fault. I love, you know, this is such human nature, you know. Okay. On the next day, the people got up early and built an altar there and offered burnt offerings and sacrifices of well-being. Then the Israelites said, who out of all the tribes of Israel did not come up in the assembly to the Lord? So who didn't go with us to fight Benjamin? Okay. For a solemn oath had been taken concerning whoever did not come up to the Lord to Mizpah, saying, that one shall be put to death. But the Israelites had compassion for Benjamin, their kin, how they did, after they killed everybody. One tribe is cut off from Israel this day. What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since we have sworn by the Lord that we will not give them any of our daughters as wives? Now, there's a conundrum. Okay? It's just the guys in the rocks, and they got no women. And what are you going to do about it? You know? We've sworn that we're not going to give any of our daughters to the Benjaminites. So we need to get some women. Then they said, is there anyone from the tribes of Israel who did not come up to the Lord to Mizpah? It turned out that no one from Jabesh Gilead had come to the camp to the assembly. And when the roll was called among the people, not one of the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead was there. So the congregation sent 12,000 soldiers there and commanded them, go put the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead to the sword, including the women and the little ones. This is what you shall do. Every male and every woman who has lain with a male, you shall devote to destruction. And they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins who had never slept with a man, and brought them to the camp at Shiloh, which is in the land of Canaan. Well, they made a vow. You know, vows are a big deal. So the vow was, anybody who doesn't come and help us fight Benjamin, we're going to devote to the sword. So they kill all the men and women and children of Jabesh Gilead, but they keep the virgins. Okay? But now, here's the problem. There's only 400 of them. Well, we're short.
The people of Jabesh Gilead,
Yeah.
what tribe were they in?
I believe they were on the east side of the Jordan. I'm not sure. I'll have to check my map.
But they were part of one of the. They were part of.
They were one of the
12
tribes also. Yeah, but that was a.
But they weren't the whole tribe. They were just.
They were a district inside the tribe. Okay. So because they're mad at Benjamin and they kill all the Benjaminites, now they go back and they kill the people of Jabesh Gilead, whose only sin was that they didn't come to fight the Benjaminites. And they end up 200 virgins short. It's tough, you go looking around for virgins, and sometimes not that easy. So here we go. Then the whole congregation sent word to the Benjaminites who were at the rocks of Rimmon and proclaimed peace to them. Benjamin returned at that time, and they gave them the women whom they had saved alive of the women of Jabesh Gilead, but they did not suffice for them. Of course, there ain't 600. They got shortchanged. So we got to find another way. Okay, the people had compassion. I love the way the people had compassion on Benjamin. Okay, because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. The Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. The Lord did that. That was God's doing. Okay, we got to fix the problem that God created. Understand? I mean, we've already done the sacrifice, so we're cool. We're good. Okay, there's nothing wrong with anything we've done. But sometimes God is a little harsh, and we just got to fix, something. God can make life complicated, and sometimes you gotta try and fix what God does wrong. So, but we're not complaining, mind you. It's just, don't worry, God will work it out for you. Okay. All right.
They were the tribe of Manasseh.
Very good. Very good.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you, Sandra. I appreciate that. That's great. Good to have a knowledgeable class.
I looked it up on the map.
Don't give it away. Okay. I'm proud of you, though. You didn't Google it. So, Sandra is our natural intelligence, not artificial. All right. So the elders of the congregation said, "What shall we do for wives who are left, since there are no women left in Benjamin?" And they said, "There must be heirs for the survivors of Benjamin, in order that a tribe may not be blotted out from Israel. Yet we cannot give any of our daughters to them as wives, for the Israelites had sworn, 'Cursed be anyone who gives a wife to Benjamin.'" It's all about the Benjamins. Okay. So they said, "Look, the yearly festival of the Lord is taking place at Shiloh, which is north of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, and south of Lebanon." And they instructed the Benjaminites, saying, "Go and lie in wait in the vineyards and watch. When the young women of Shiloh come out to dance in the dances, then come out of the vineyards, and each of you carry off a wife for himself from the young women of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. Then if their fathers or their brothers come to complain to us, we will say to them, 'Be generous and allow us to have them, because we did not capture in battle a wife for each man.'" Because they killed them. Okay. "But neither did you incur guilt by giving your daughters to them." See, they didn't swear that they wouldn't give their daughters to Benjamin, right? And even if they had, they didn't give their daughters to Benjamin. They were stolen. Fair is fair. Okay. "But neither do you incur guilt by giving your daughters to them. The Benjaminites did so. They took wives for each of them from the dancers whom they abducted. Then they went and returned to their territory and rebuilt the towns and lived in them. So the Israelites departed from there at that time by tribes and families, and they went out from there to their own territories. In those days, there was no king in Israel. All the people did what was right in their own eyes, and you can see what a mess that is. Okay, and so ends the book of Judges. Thank God. You wouldn't think that God could mess things up that badly, but there it is. And
do you think this is kind of a fabrication? I mean, you've talked before about how they embellish things to make it look like when they were trying to make peace with someone, or this almost seems like a fairy tale.
Good for you, Van.
Just crazy.
Whenever history is written by the victors, watch out.
Yeah.
Okay?
Really, do you think this just seems so bizarre?
I think it would take more than this event for that level of hostility to have happened. I think that there had been probably issues with the tribe of Benjamin other than this before that, but this was like the straw that broke the camel's back. Okay, let's fast forward to our own history, and there were, from the very beginning, there were both peaceful and hostile relations with Native Americans by European people that came in. And most of the time, when there was peace between the Europeans and the Native Americans, there was trade going on between them, and they got along quite well. They got along quite well until there was some kind of a natural event that prevented them from being more generous. Like, for instance, during the 1600s, during Jamestown, and also when what became the Lost Colony settled, there was a time of incredible drought. And people didn't believe in coincidence. They believed that one thing always led to, if something new happened and then something else happened, that if those two things happened together, then there was a cause and effect. Okay? So when the settlers came in and there was a huge drought, the Native Americans thought, the gods are not happy with us because we have these settlers here amongst us and we're trading with them and they're changing our lifestyle, and it's the same thing that was going on back then, where they were worried about Canaanite ideas infiltrating into Israelite ideas, because the Canaanite people were more advanced than the Israelite people that came in. And so they're going to want to open trade in order to get better metal products, new technologies, things like that. And then, you start to wonder, well, what's wrong with our God that we didn't get metal technologies from our God? And so they start looking around, and other people are having a fun time with their gods, and this one that they had dragging us out of Egypt, sometimes starved us, sometimes made us die of thirst, and there were other times when the earth opened up and swallowed us up for some kind of offense. And this God hasn't always been a happy God. And but the Canaanite gods have a lot of fun in their worship, so and they're smart. They got ideas from other places, and so you have that cultural transfer, and the traditionalists will always think that cultural transfer is detrimental, and so that's why a lot of times there were hostilities between settlers and Native Americans. Plus which, they're both greedy. It was not a peaceful place when the settlers showed up. This idea of stealing women from another tribe was nothing new. This was going on on this continent long before any Europeans set foot here. And every warring culture has done this down through history. They've taken away prizes and they've stolen the women, and all of that stuff. It's only been in very recent history where that kind of behavior as a result of conflict is not condoned. So I think we're making some progress. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I'm saying that if you go in and you start stealing other people's women, that's probably not looked upon very nicely. Okay, you look at what's going on in Africa and some of these Islamic butchery tribes that come in and they butcher Christians and they steal young girls out of the schools and haul them off. We're appalled by it. We're appalled by it, and most of the world is appalled by it. But back then, and for most of human history, that was just the way you kept the gene pool healthy. And it was It's awful. But now, we have an issue, and here we have issues where when the Europeans got into warfare, they kind of had rules of engagement. They had developed some rules of engagement. There was some level of civility in European cultures where you didn't necessarily torture for and kill for fun the people that you had captured. And now that, I'm not saying it didn't happen, because it did, but you know, they had kind of moved beyond that. When they got over here, Native Americans were still doing that. And in some tribes it moved all the way to cannibalism, but they had fun torturing their captives. And they would move into a settlement, and they committed all kinds of atrocities in the settlements. And I think that we are very slow learners as a species. But my observation is, I'm not saying that what happened to Native Americans was justified in any way, okay? But what I am saying is that once you resort to terrorism, whatever rationale you had, justified or not, is irrelevant for doing what you were doing. You've lost your argument. If you behave in a bestial way, it doesn't matter if you had a good reason to go into war or not. Nothing you do is justified. And we're seeing this kind of thing happening in Ukraine right now, with the behavior of the Russians as they've moved into Ukrainian territory, and the atrocities that they've committed, the stealing of children, the targeting of civilians in preference to targeting military targets or infrastructure targets alone. The Russians have actually gone after populations, and they've hit deliberately, because you've got to pre-program the drones that they're using to go to a certain coordinate. So they've hit kindergartens, and they've hit hospitals, and they've done it intentionally. You look at Hamas, and Hamas hides itself in schools and in hospitals and things, so that when they are attacked, it looks like you're attacking a school or a hospital. And they complain a lot about civilian casualties, but they're the primary reason why those casualties happen, because you can't sort them out in the process. So we have committed, in some cases, it got to the point in terms of the conflicts between Native Americans and white settlers, that some white settlers, especially those who lived on the frontiers, were in favor of a genocidal solution to the Native American problem, if you want to call it a problem, okay? The people who had already resolved those property issues and warlike issues in the East were not so keen on genocide being committed by Americans. They felt that there was a moral dimension that was being violated in that process. And, you know, history gets, like you were saying, Dan, history gets written in different ways by the victors. But one of the people who was really keen on committing genocide was George Armstrong Custer, hero of the Civil War, cavalry officer, and he was dead set on killing every Indian he could get his hands on, and he did commit a genocide, and was, at the time of Little Bighorn, he was under consideration for a court-martial because of the actions that he had taken with the previous tribe. He had killed men, women, and children in that tribe, and had done it wantonly. And he was doing it because he had political aspirations. So, you know, the people back east said, well, you know, we may have had an issue with these tribes, but that's not the way you settle it. You don't commit genocide, and you don't attack non-combatants like that. And, you know, we were beginning to catch on. The wars that we had with Native Americans were intense and they were brutal on both sides. It's no question they were intense and they were brutal on both sides. The thing that makes it a little bit kind of like this story is that the nation did not adopt a genocidal solution to the problem. I'm not saying that there weren't people who violated that along the way, but the general policy was that the objective was not to annihilate a people, it was to displace them. And also to make it so that they were economically disadvantaged or dependent somehow so that they would not rise up and become a problem again. That's basically what the national policy was, and that's why we have reservations and Indian territories, and even to this day we recognize a certain amount of sovereignty on Indian lands. So it's kind of like this story with the Benjaminites. They virtually committed genocide against this tribe, but they knew that they were bumping up against something that God wanted. He wanted 12 tribes. And so they couldn't go so far as to totally annihilate that tribe. So they found a solution, horrible as it was, to keeping that tribe somewhat intact. And it's kind of interesting, in the later histories, under later kings, the 10 tribes, the northern tribes, were carried off by their insurrection against the Assyrian Empire, but Benjamin and Judah stayed united with each other. The two southern tribes were the only two that the Assyrians didn't take right away. They did later, but not right away. They became Babylonians later, so they came in and took those. But in terms of who would be the most loyal to the old way of life, the old religion, it would be Benjamin and Judah more than the other tribes. Go figure.
And I believe that you said a few Sundays back that these people, writers, judges, they weren't trying to prove that they needed a king.
Yes.
The judges were not just.
The judges weren't making it. They just, it wasn't working.
They may have exaggerated a little bit to prove their point.
Maybe they did. In fact, very likely they did. Understand, there was no fact-checking, there was no YouTube to fact-check somebody's story or whatever. You didn't have any of that. All of this writing was commissioned by a monarch, or several monarchs. So you're going to get the perspective of a monarch in this, and their perspective was that things go really badly if there is not a king in charge. Okay, they hadn't even considered anything like a democracy or a republic or anything like that. You didn't have, among the tribes, you had a very flimsy, uncoordinated, unscheduled times when tribal leaders would confer with each other. But they were not necessarily elected to the office, and they maintained a national sovereignty within their tribes that they didn't have a strong central government. And so this whole book of Judges is an argument for a strong central government. That doesn't always work out if you have the wrong kind of government. We have found today that there are some central governments that are really lousy. Okay, they're trying to figure that out in Iran right now. They're going to be figuring out in China and in Russia, because the dynamics of what's happening in Iran are just beginning to stir in those other countries. But when you can have a strong central government that's lousy, and you can have a restrained central government that can do well. Our solution is to have a central government that is heavily restrained. And every time the central government begins to exceed that restraint, you're going to find people who are unhappy about it. Sometimes the central government is right, and sometimes the central government is wrong. So, okay, that's it for the book of Judges. Next we'll get into another lousy couple of books, 1st and 2nd Samuel. Some of my least favorite books too. So we're going to have fun with old Samuel. Hang on to your old Sunday school lessons. We're going places you wouldn't believe.
Are we gonna do Ruth?
Yes, we're going to do Ruth too.
That's it.
And that's next. So next we're going to do Ruth. Another crossover Gentile-Jewish story, okay? It's fairly brief. Some people even wonder how the book of Ruth got into the Bible, but we'll be looking at that too. So, okay, we'll have a respite with Ruth, which is a nicer story, and then we'll get into the Samuel. See you later.
It makes you wonder.